Thanksgiving. Last year, my son's wife told everyone at my kitchen table that I get confused about paperwork. She said it to Derek, not to me, like I was the centerpiece and not one of the people eating dinner. He means well, Cassie said, refilling her wine. But honestly, the paperwork side of things is just a lot for him now. We've been managing most of it. Derek looked at his plate. Emma, she's 11, looked at me, the way kids do when they know something is wrong and can't name it yet. Cooper kept eating. He's 8. He was working on a roll. I am 66 years old. I wired my own house the year before Derek was born. I ran a union crew for 34 years and then ran my own shop for 12 more. I have never missed a mortgage payment. I drove myself to Margaret's last 3 rounds of chemo and drove myself home afterward and went back to work the next morning because that was what needed to be done. Cassie said I get confused about paperwork. I set my fork down. I looked at Derek. He was still looking at his plate. The kitchen light above the counter flickered. It's been doing that for 2 years. Margaret used to say it made the kitchen look like a bar. I thought about that. Then I reached into my jacket, which was hanging on my chair the way it always is, and I said, I'd like to show you both something before dessert. I set a folder on the table between the green bean casserole and the bread basket. Cassie's smile didn't move, but her hand did. There were 3 pages inside that folder. The first was a letter from Tom Harwick at Harwick Law on Jefferson Street. My name is Walt Greer. I'm 66 years old, and I live in Brownsburg, Indiana, which is a town about 20 miles west of Indianapolis. I've lived in the same brick ranch house on Belmead Drive for 31 years. I know every inch of it. I hung the drywall in the basement with my brother-in-law, Roy, in the summer of 1993. I rewired the kitchen myself in 2007 because the original panel was undersized and I'd been meaning to fix it for years. I put a workshop in the attached garage in 2011 when Margaret started calling my pile of tools a fire hazard, and I decided the best response was to organize them so thoroughly she'd have nothing to say. She still had things to say. That was Margaret. I started as a journeyman with IBEW Local 481 Inches Indianapolis when I was 22. I worked my way up to foreman by 30. I spent 34 years on union crews, commercial, industrial, some residential, hospitals, schools, the kind of jobs where if you get it wrong, someone gets hurt. I was never the smartest man on a crew, but I was the one who showed up. 4:30 in the morning, 6 days a week when the job required it, and I required it a lot. When I was 54, I retired from the union with a pension and immediately started Greer Electric, my own contracting business. I told her I'd lost it 20 years earlier, and this was just the first time I'd acted on it. I ran the shop for 12 years, never more than 6 employees, always commercial, mostly repeat clients. I closed it 3 years ago when my knees started telling me things I didn't want to hear. By then, Derek was grown and gone. By then, Margaret was 8 years gone. I want to tell you what I had when she died. I'm going to tell you the actual numbers, because that's how I think about things. The house was paid off. We'd done that in 2019. I had a pension from Local 481, my Social Security, and what I'd managed to put away from Greer Electric, which wasn't as much as I'd planned because there were 2 years that were lean and a 3rd year Margaret was sick and I barely made it to the shop at all. But I had enough. Oh, I had a paid-off house. A truck, I maintain myself. A workshop full of tools I know by name. And a green recipe box on the kitchen counter that Margaret used for 40 years and that I have not moved once since the day she died. That's what I had. Then Derek married Cassie. I liked Cassie the first 2 years. I want to be honest about that. She was polished in a way Derek wasn't. She'd grown up in Carmel, went to Butler, worked in real estate. She talked fast and knew things about restaurants and had opinions about everything and could hold a dinner conversation without a single silence, which I found both impressive and slightly exhausting. But she was warm, or she seemed warm. She asked me questions about the union, about Margaret, about how I built the shop. She came over and helped Derek when he painted the guest bedroom. She brought me a lasagna, the first Christmas after the divorce her brother went through. Said she knew the holidays could be hard when someone was missing. I thought, Derek did well. The first time I noticed something shift, it was small. It was the year after they got married. Derek called one Sunday. This would have been in the evening, after 6, which is unusual for him because he's usually watching football, and said that he and Cassie had been talking about the future, about making sure I was protected. Protected from what? I said. Just, Dad. Estate stuff. If something happened to you, you don't have a current will. I told him I had a will. I'd done it years ago with Tom Harwick. Derek said that was a long time ago. I told him it was still my name on it, so it was still current as far as I was concerned. He said okay. We talked about something else. 3 weeks later, Cassie called. She had found an estate planning attorney she thought I should meet. Very reasonable rates. Very thorough. She'd already made an appointment, she said, for next Thursday at 2 if that worked for me. I said I had Thursday coffee with Tom. She said she'd reschedule. I said, don't reschedule. Then I said thank you, and got off the phone and sat with it for a minute. She'd already made the appointment. I didn't say anything to Derek about that. I thought, maybe she was just trying to help. That's what I told myself. She's organized. She's a planner. Estate planning makes sense. She's not wrong that these things matter. I let it go. And then the way things do when you let them go, it kept coming. Over the next 2 years, there were more conversations about managing things. Cassie set up online bill pay on my behalf for 3 accounts, which I didn't ask for but didn't stop because the process of setting it up seemed more trouble to undo than to accept. She started coming over on Saturdays to help, which mostly meant reorganizing things that didn't need reorganizing, and going through the filing cabinet in the spare room looking for documents she said she needed for the estate file she was keeping. I found her in the spare room one Saturday in March. She was going through the top drawer of the filing cabinet, which is where I keep the mortgage papers, the title to the truck, Margaret's insurance documents. Finding what you need? I said. Just organizing, she said. She smiled. She had a folder under her arm. I said, what's in the folder? She said, copies. For the file. I'm keeping everything in one place so Derek and I can access it if we ever need to. I said. She said, of course, Walt. I just want to make it easier. I said, I'll take the folder. There was a half second before she handed it over. The way you pause when you're calculating. Inside were copies of the mortgage payoff letter, the truck title, and 2 pages of what looked like a legal document I didn't recognize. I said, what's this? She said it was a power of attorney document standard, she said. Just in case. Something the estate attorney had recommended. Very common. Did I sign this? I said. She said I had. 6 months ago. At the estate attorney's office. I'd signed several documents that day, she said. It was all very routine. I didn't remember signing it. But I'd also signed several things that day, and I'd trusted that Cassie had read them, and that they were what she said they were. I kept my face neutral. I put the pages back in the folder. I handed the folder back to her. I said, thank you, Cassie. She smiled. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table for a while. The light above the counter flickered. I looked at Margaret's recipe box on the counter and noticed it was 6 inches to the left of where it always sits. Margaret kept that box in the same spot for 40 years. I put it back where it belonged. The following Thursday, I drove to the Cracker Barrel on State Road 136 and had coffee with Tom Harwick. Tom is 71. He's been a general practice attorney in Brownsburg for 30 years. I wired his office building in 2003. When he moved from a shared suite to his own space on Jefferson Street, it was a bigger job than I quoted him for. And I didn't charge him the difference, because he'd sent me 3 referrals that year, and I wanted to keep the relationship clean. We've had coffee on Thursdays ever since. He drives a 12-year-old Buick LeSabre he is inexplicably devoted to. I ordered coffee. I put the 2 pages from Cassie's folder on the table between our mugs. Tom read them. He read them again. Then he set them down and drank some coffee and looked out the window at the parking lot for a moment. He does that when he's deciding how to say something. "Walt," he said, "did you understand what you were signing when you signed this?" "I signed what she put in front of me," I said. "She said it was estate planning. Standard documents." Tom looked at the pages again. "This is a durable power of attorney," he said. "It names Cassie as your primary agent. That means if you were to become incapacitated, or if someone were to argue that you were, she has broad authority to make decisions about your finances, your property, your health care." "Incapacitated," I said. "It's a standard document," he said. "But it's also an extremely powerful one, and you should have had your own attorney explain it before you signed." He paused. "You should have called me," I said. "I'm calling you now." Tom helped me understand the full picture over the next hour. The document was signed. It was legal. It didn't mean Cassie had taken anything yet, but it meant she could, under certain circumstances. And there were other things Tom thought I should look into. Whether any accounts had had signatory authority changed, whether any property documents had been altered. I spent the next 3 weeks finding out. I did it quietly. I called the bank. I called the county assessor's office. I went through every piece of paper in my filing cabinet, every drawer, every folder. I found 2 things that mattered. 1. Cassie had been added as a co-signatory on one of my bank accounts. She had my signature. I'd signed something at the bank the year before, when Derek said it would make it easier to help me with bill management. I hadn't asked what I was signing. I'd trusted. 2. There was an unsigned deed transfer document in the filing cabinet. It had my name on it, my property address, and a space for my signature. It had not been signed, but it had been printed and it had been placed in my filing cabinet, between the mortgage payoff letter and my union pension papers. Someone had been hoping I would sign it without reading it. I brought both of these to Tom. Tom was quiet for longer than usual. Then he asked me what I wanted to do. I said I wanted to be clear. I said I wanted it to be impossible for this to happen without my knowledge going forward. And I said I wanted my son to understand what had been happening in his house. Tom said he could help with all 3 of those things. Over the next 2 weeks, we set up an irrevocable trust. The house, the truck, the accounts into the trust, with me as the trustee for the remainder of my life. Tom drafted the revocation of the power of attorney. He also drafted a letter explaining everything clearly, without accusation, just facts, dates, document names, what was done, and when. When everything was filed and everything was ready, I put 3 pages in a folder, and I waited for Thanksgiving. Let me tell you what those weeks looked like from the outside. I went to the shop on Tuesdays, meant to hand to hand to hand to hand of her, to hand to hand to hand to hand it from Hedred 4 route, to 167 where I sometimes help out when they're short-handed. Nothing heavy, just hands on something familiar. I fixed the back porch step that had been soft for a year. I drove out to the county fairgrounds on a Thursday in October. The fairgrounds are empty that time of year, and the light in October in Indiana is a specific thing, low and gold, the kind that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. And I walked for an hour. I thought about Margaret a lot that month. Not with sadness, exactly. More with the specific quality of missing someone's opinion. Margaret had known from the first Thanksgiving that something was off about Cassie. She'd never said it plainly, but she'd pulled me into the kitchen that night. This would have been the year Derek brought Cassie for the first time, so Margaret was still with us, and said, "That woman is going to be very good at getting what she wants." And then she went back to the gravy. I should have thought about that sentence more than I did. In the evenings, I sat at the kitchen table. I drank coffee. The light above the counter flickered. I did not fix it. I looked at the recipe box in its place on the counter and thought about the 40 years of Sunday mornings when Margaret would open it on this exact counter and look through the cards for something she already knew by memory. Thanksgiving this year was at my house. It's always at my house. Has been since we bought the place. Derek and Cassie arrived at 11 in the morning. Emma and Cooper came in first. Cooper immediately asked if I'd fixed the step, and I said yes. And he went to test it personally. Emma found the recipe box on the counter and asked if we were making Margaret's sweet potato casserole. I said yes. That's what the box was out for. Cassie came in with wine and a dish she'd made herself, and a comment about how the kitchen could use updating if I ever wanted to do it. She said it to Derek, not to me. She smiled at me, though. Dinner was good, I'll say that. The turkey was right. Emma ate more than she expected. Cooper fell asleep in the armchair in the living room after his second plate and woke up confused about what year it was, which I found entertaining. The trouble started after dinner, when the dishes were on the counter and we were still at the table. Cassie had been on her phone for a few minutes, and she set it down and said to Derek, in that warm, practical tone she uses when she has already decided something, "I was looking at some information about Hendricks County Senior Living last week. They have a real nice waiting list process. Now you can get on the list without committing to a move date. It might be worth looking into before the real need comes up. Get ahead of it." Derek said, "Yeah, we can look into that. I'm not on a waiting list," I said. "Of course not yet," Cassie said pleasantly. "That's the point of the waiting list." Emma looked at me. I looked at my coffee. "He does well here," Derek said. It was the most he'd said in my defense in about a year. "He does," Cassie agreed. "But the yard, the upkeep, it's a lot for one person. And honestly, managing all the paperwork and finances alone at this age," she glanced at me. The glance was kind. "He gets confused about some of it sometimes. It's not a criticism, it's just reality." There it was. The kitchen light flickered once. Emma was watching me. I reached into my jacket on the back of the chair. I said, "I'd like to show you both something before dessert." I placed the folder on the table between the green bean casserole and the bread basket. 3 pages. Derek leaned forward and picked them up. He read the first paragraph of the first page and looked at me. I said, "The first page is a letter from Tom Harwick explaining the irrevocable trust I set up 4 weeks ago. The house, the truck, and my accounts are in the trust. I am the trustee. I will remain the trustee for the remainder of my life, and the structure cannot be changed without my signature," Cassie said. "Walt, you didn't need to." "Second page," I said, "is the revocation of the durable power of attorney. As of the 14th of this month, you no longer have authority to act on my behalf in any financial or healthcare matter, Cassie." Tom filed it with the county. "It's done." The room was quiet. Cooper had woken up in the armchair in the next room. I heard him shift. "Derek. Dot. Third page," I said, "is a copy of the deed transfer document that was in my filing cabinet. It was between my mortgage payoff letter and my pension papers. It had my name on it and a space for my signature." I looked at Cassie. It hadn't been signed. Cassie looked at Derek. Derek did not look at her. "I'm not calling anyone," I said. "I'm not filing anything. What I am telling you is that this doesn't happen again. Not the power of attorney, not the account access, not the filing cabinet." I paused. "Not the recipe box," Cassie said. "That was just." "I know what it was," I said. Emma excused herself from the table very quietly. She is 11, and she is perceptive, and she understood that she should not be at the table right now. She went to the living room. I heard her wake Cooper and say something to him in a low voice. Derek had not said anything. He was looking at the 3 pages in his hand. His jaw was doing the thing it does when he's trying to decide something, tightening and releasing. Tightening and releasing. I said, "I love you, son." "That's not what's on the table right now," Cassie said, in a voice that had lost most of its warmth. "So what is on the table, Walt?" I said. "An understanding." I stood up. I picked up the plates and took them to the sink. I asked Emma and Cooper if they wanted sweet potato casserole. I want to stop here. Not to summarize. I'm not interested in tying this up neatly, because it doesn't tie up neatly. What happened with Cassie isn't unusual. I've talked to people since then, not many. I'm not much of a talker, but enough. What I keep hearing is some version of the same thing. A parent gets older, and there is a gap between what they can do and what someone younger thinks they should be able to do. And into that gap someone steps, and they call it helping. Sometimes it is helping. Sometimes it's something else wearing helping's clothes. What Cassie did, I've thought about it a lot, and I'm going to be honest with you the way I try to be honest about everything. I don't think she set out to steal from me. I think she set out to manage a situation she saw as a problem, and she is the kind of woman who manages situations. And somewhere in the managing, she stopped asking whether I wanted to be managed. And then, the managing started to look a lot like control. And then, the documents started appearing. I don't know at what point a person crosses that line. I don't think Cassie knew either. But here is what I keep coming back to. She said I got confused about paperwork. At my own table. In my own house. In front of my grandchildren. And Derek did not say anything. That's the part I think about most. Not Cassie. Derek. I raised that boy to be honest. To speak up when something was wrong. And he sat at my kitchen table, while his wife told everyone I was losing my competence. And he looked at his plate. I don't know what happened to the version of Derek I raised. I'm not sure it's entirely his fault. I'm not sure it's entirely hers. I'm not sure blame is the right frame for any of this. But I needed him to see what was happening. And I needed to do it somewhere he couldn't look away from. The holiday table was the only room in our lives where he couldn't leave. Was that the right choice? I genuinely don't know. The kids were there. Emma is old enough that she understood more than she should have. I've thought about whether I should have waited for a different moment. I've thought about whether I should have pulled Derek aside first, alone, without Cassie, and told him what I knew. Maybe. I don't know. What I know is that I had spent 3 weeks watching my son let his wife speak for him, and I needed him to stop watching. I needed him to be in a room where he had to choose. Here is the question I've been sitting with. At what point does protecting yourself from your own family become the loneliest thing in the world? I don't have an answer. I just live with the question. Derek called me the Monday after Thanksgiving. Not Cassie, Derek. He said, "I didn't know about the deed document, Dad. I want you to know that." I said, "Okay." He said, "I knew about the power of attorney. She said it was standard." "Did you read it?" I said. A pause. "No," he said. I said, "Fair enough." That was most of the call. Things between Derek and me are better now than they were 3 months ago. Not good better. We have dinner every few weeks. He comes alone most of the time. He doesn't explain why, and I don't ask. Cassie and I are civil. That's all I'm going to say about that. Emma came over in December to make Christmas cookies. She knows where the recipe box is. She opened it herself, found the sugar cookie card, and had it on the counter before I'd gotten out the flour. Margaret had the card written out in blue pen on a piece of index card that was stained with vanilla from some year in the 80s. Emma held it up and said, "Grandpa, This card is older than Dad. I said, most of the good things in this kitchen are. I let her make the cookies. She made a mess. I cleaned it up after she went home and stood at the counter for a while, with the kitchen light flickering above me. I still haven't fixed it. Margaret used to say it made the kitchen look like a bar. I think she would have liked a kitchen that looked like a bar. I'm going to leave it for a while longer. If you are a parent watching this, if any part of this felt familiar, I want to tell you something. Noticing is not paranoia. Asking questions is not aggression. Wanting to understand what people are doing in your filing cabinet is not being difficult. These are not signs of confusion. These are signs of someone who spent a lifetime building something and has not yet forgotten what it cost. You have the right to know what you signed. You have the right to ask who has access to what and why. You have the right to put things back where they belong. And you have the right to sit quietly at a table with a folder in your jacket and wait for the right moment. Nobody gets to decide when your moment is over. Nobody gets to put you on a waiting list while you're still standing in your own kitchen. I'm not sure I handled every part of this right. I'm not sure Derek and I will ever fully get back to what we were before Cassie, or before whatever it was that let Cassie happen. I don't know. 6 months is not enough time to know. But I know this much. The house on Belmead Drive is mine. The truck is mine. The workshop is mine. The recipe box on the kitchen counter is mine. And Margaret's. And nobody else's. And when the time comes for me to not be here anymore, which will come, because everything comes, what I leave behind will be what I decided to leave. Not what someone decided for me. That's enough for me. Drop me your verdict in the comments. I read them all. Was I too quiet for too long, or did I handle it right? Tell me honestly. And if you know a parent who gives everything and gets treated like a line item, send this to them, not as advice, just so they know they're not alone. I'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves, and check what you've signed.